Lost somebody sometime. Everybody falls in love somehow.
He was a drop-dead dreamboat with a don't-give-a-damn smile and a voice that could melt ice. He oozed sex and sin, and he was the coolest cat in showbiz.
An atom bomb could explode 25 feet away from Dean. Dean would turn around and look. What was that?
But under the carefree facade that Dean Martin so carefully cultivated was a man of rigid indifference, a man calloused by pain and sorrow, a man who eventually preferred seclusion and scotch to the comfort of his own family.
Dean, he didn't communicate that well. I mean, he was very laid back. He made Perry Como look like a nervous wreck.
In the next 2 hours, we will present the extraordinary story of Dean Paul Martin, told by those who shared his life with him, including, in an exclusive interview, the legendary Jerry Lewis.
Because you and me, Alvin, we're going to be together a long, long time. You and me, we're friends, right?
He was always this humongous man who could just do whatever was necessary, in my eyes, because he was my hero. He was always my hero.
We will take you from Steubenville, Ohio to Beverly Hills, California, a journey marked by a meteoric rise to fame.
If you're interested in comedy, watch how he did it. If you're interested in music, watch how he did it.
You'll share his enormous success in Hollywood, both on and off screen.
I wanted to play Hamlet, but they talked me out of it.
I can't think of any woman who would have turned him down. I mean, he loved the family, he loved being home, but he loved beautiful women.
We'll ring-a-ding-ding with Dino, Frank, and the boys in Vegas.
If all the women in Texas were as ugly as your mama, the Lone Ranger gonna be alone for a long time, yeah.
When the Rat Pack was in town, there was an electricity in the town that it was palpable.
We'll follow Dean through his marriages and hear from the beauty queen who stole Dean's heart.
You just looked right in my eyes, and I looked right, and it was a soul look. I mean, it really clicked.
And we'll examine the gut-wrenching tragedy that cut Dean's heart out and changed him forever.
He died 8 years before his actual death, because nothing he did was Dean after that.
We'll go behind the clinking glass, the dangling cigarette, and the wistful smile into the heart of a deeply private man who spent a lifetime hiding his emotions. Dean Martin, the true Hollywood story.
Everybody knows somebody sometime.
For life's ambition was to be a star.
Never recover from the public scandal.
I remember hands, my grandfather's hands, which were these all-encompassing things. I remember his watch was this tiny, I don't know what it is, but it was this gold chain, and it was gorgeous. And his lighter, his Dunhill lighter. And whenever he'd light a cigarette, like the lighter would disappear in his hands. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea what he meant to people.
Dean Martin was born Dino Crosetti in Steubenville, Ohio on June 7, 1917. He was the youngest of 2 sons. Dino's father was Italian immigrant Guy Crosetti, a barber. His mother, Angela, was a seamstress known for her elaborate wedding gowns. Steubenville was a steel town. In 1917, at the height of World War I, its mills forged weapons for America's doughboys. At night, Steubenville became a gambling mecca, the turf of Al Capone's wise guys. Dino's longtime friend, Harry Greenberg.
There were all kinds of clubs in the place. I'm talking about 10 or 15, even more clubs right in the area. There was the gambling places, the prostitution was going on a street called Water Street. They didn't call Steubenville Little Chicago for nothing.
To protect Dino in this tough environment, his mother Angela armed him with advice that shaped his entire life. She told Dino to be strong and to hide his emotions from others. Daughter Deanna Martin Griffith.
My grandmother, she was that way. She never complained. She was just the most remarkable woman I've ever known. And I know that she did tell him just to be strong and, you know, don't cry. That was like an Italian thing, you know, to be a man, to not cry. That was the way Dad lived.
At 10, Dino discovered music. He became the drummer for a Boy Scout troop at St. Agnes's Church. Then Dino and pal Mario Camerlengo joined a children's band.
Our parents would take us down like 1 o'clock to about 4 or 5 o'clock, and we'd practice. And then we had a concert at Grant School, April 1930. And it was a great success, and naturally it was a great success. We had all our parents, aunts, and uncles there.
As a teenager, Dino Crossetti idolized crooner Bing Crosby. While his pals played sandlot sports, Dino began to sing.
Oh,
me, my sister, and Dino had a little group called the Gondoliers. My sister named that. And we would play at different houses and little baptisms and little things like that. And Dino would do the singing.
The dark-haired boy took quite a beating at the start.
In 1933, at the age of 16, Dino dropped out of school and took up prize fighting. Joe Perrone was Dino's assistant.
He had a big nose at that time, so he had to watch. He didn't want anybody touching his nose. So he was tall and thin. He could keep you away from him. With his left hand, he kept everybody away from him.
Dino lost more fights than he won. At 17, he gave up boxing and took a job in a Steubenville steel mill. In 1934, Dino and a buddy took a vacation trip to Hollywood. Here, peering through the gates of Paramount Movie Studios, Dino discovered the life he wanted, in show business.
Cut! Great!
He returned to Steubenville, quit the steel mill, and began singing in local nightclubs. Pal Dorman Panabianco.
We started when he was like 18, 19. We went in different clubs and sat in and sang. Like them little clubs, you know, where they had them small bands. They'd let him sing.
Dean had a very beautiful voice even at that time. His problem at that time was that he would hold notes longer than he was supposed to hold them. So he would come in and he would sing a song like maybe O Solo Mio. He'd say, O Solo Mio, and he'd hold the note out for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you know, and he wasn't supposed to.
To pay the bills, Dino got a job running the roulette wheel and dealing blackjack in a Steubenville casino. After hours, he sang at various Steubenville clubs.
He got to the point where he was it was as though he owned the place. He would come in the place, walk straight back, grab the microphone, and start singing, no accompaniment.
During the late 1930s, Dino gave up his casino job and began performing full-time in clubs. Between 1937 and 1940, Dino worked the Ohio club circuit from Steubenville to Columbus and finally to Cleveland, the big time in Dino's mind.
There was a lot of nightclubs, and he used to sing in them. He loved to sing, and he always said he was going to make it.
But he wasn't going to make it as Dino Crossetti. In 1940, Cleveland band leader Sammy Watkins decided to change Dino's name to make it sound more American. Dino Crossetti became Dean Martin. In 1941, while performing in Cleveland, 24-year-old Dean met 18-year-old Elizabeth Ann Betty McDonald. She was wearing a red sombrero, which she bought to catch Dean's eye. Betty's sister, Ann Herron.
One night she went into dinner, waited till Dean was in the middle of the number, and sashayed in wearing the red sombrero, and brought everything to a halt, and he just cracked up. He couldn't stop laughing.
Betty and Dean fell in love and married that same year. Betty adored Dean and slavishly took care of him.
You go in and she's down on the floor because the hotel didn't furnish an ironing board, and she's ironing his dress shirts before he went on stage, and she did that many, many times.
A double hernia kept Martin out of World War II. In 1942, Dean and Betty had their first child, Craig Martin. Dean struggled to make a living, but in early 1943 he caught a break. A young crooner named Frank Sinatra cut short a run at New York's Riobamba Club, and Dean was called to fill in. Arriving in New York for the first time, Dean met singer Sonny King.
We saw Dean, and he was very good, and he stayed 4 weeks at the Riobamba. and then he had nothing else in sight.
Disappointed but undaunted, Dean returned to Cleveland. In 1944, after Betty gave birth to their second child, Claudia, Dean left his family in Ohio, returned to New York, and moved into a cheap room with Sonny King and King's manager.
One of us would bunk in with him for a week, and the other one would take the 3 pillows and put them on the floor and sleep on those. And then we would switch.
The living conditions were primitive, but Dean didn't suffer for long. In 2 years, he would be one of the biggest stars in America. When the E! True Hollywood story continues, Dean Martin meets a 19-year-old comic who helps him write show business history.
When those guys are ready for it, I'll give it to them.
In less than 3 days, the lines around the 500 Club were so fierce that they had to turn out the local police to enforce some law.
And later, a blonde beauty queen steals Dean's heart.
He fell in love with Jeannie, and if Betty and Dean hadn't divorced, it probably would have played itself out.
In 1943, Dean Martin was a 26-year-old singer hustling to make it in New York. He had the voice, the looks. He just needed some luck. Dean's big break soon arrived in the form of a skinny burlesque comic. Dean spent 1944 struggling in New York with roommate Sonny King.
We used to buy 2 suits, different colors, matching colors, so that when Dean would wear the gray and the black pants, I would wear the black pants and the gray. And then we would wear our own suits, the gray suit and the black suit, and then switch.
Despite having a wife and 2 children back in Ohio, Dean was anything but the devoted family man. In New York, he started to play around a lot.
We met 2 girls that were living at the all-women's hotel in New York City. I forget the name of the hotel. And it was all girls. And Dean wanted to see that girl that night, so we went up the fire escape. And we had the police following us. And we spent the night in jail.
In the summer of 1944, comic Lou Costello caught Dean's act. The 38-year-old Costello was the wacky half of Abbott and Costello, then one of America's most successful comedy teams. Costello urged Dean to get a nose job. Former sister-in-law Ann Herron remembers.
Lou Costello was the one who gave him the money for it. A lot of people, besides my sister, mentioned that it would be a good idea, it would help him in his career, but she was the one that really urged him to have it done.
Plastic surgery improved Dean's looks, but his job prospects remained poor. To make a little extra money, he and King staged boxing matches in their hotel room with odd ground rules.
Dean had just had his nose fixed, so I wasn't allowed to hit him from here to there. Only down there, and we charged $5 a piece. We'd get 10 guys in this little room, and we'd box out, I mean, bare knuckles.
The bare-knuckle brawlers attracted new fans. Like many entertainers at the time, Dean and Sonny became friendly with New York mobsters.
We had to be. We had to be because we worked for them. There was no nightclub at that time that didn't have a hand in it. And we worked them, and they treated us like we were royalty.
In August 1944, Lou Costello arranged for Dean to sing in the glass hat room of New York's Belmont Plaza Hotel. Here, 27-year-old Dean first met an 18-year-old comic performing in the hotel. The comic's name was Jerry Lewis.
I was having breakfast in a coffee shop one day, and he sat down next to me. He said, "We keep running into one another. What do you do?" I said, I do comedy. I'm in the glass hat of this hotel. He said, "Really?" "Yeah, it's nice." And I asked him what he did. He said, "I'm a singer." We just hit it off. There was some kind of a chemistry between us.
Dean and Jerry got chummy that summer, but never worked together on stage. In 1945, with Dean still in New York, Betty gave birth to their 3rd child, Gail, in Ohio. For the next year, Dean gained exposure by playing small clubs on the East Coast. Then in 1946, Dean and Jerry met again at another New York club, the Havana Madrid.
He was one of the acts and I was one of the acts, and we had a great time appearing with one another on the same show, but never ever doing anything theatrically together during that time.
After 2 weeks, Dean and Jerry went their separate ways again. In March of 1945, several talent scouts thought the handsome singer could be Hollywood's next big star. Dean made screen tests for Columbia Studios and MGM. But Columbia boss Harry Cohn took one look and called Dean's test a complete waste of time. Because according to Cohn, Dean cannot talk at all. MGM also passed on Dean. But Dean could sing. That summer of 1945, he made his first record, and Martin's wife, Betty, was wild with excitement.
We were at home, and she'd say, 4:15, station WCAU, they're playing one of Dean's records. So we'd get everybody, our friends off the street, and my mother would sit down and call all the neighbors and the relatives, and everybody would listen at 4:15 for this 1 3-minute Dean Martin record.
Dean was at a crossroads in his career. He sang beautifully, but so did many others. It was at this exact moment that fate intervened, and Dean's life profoundly changed. In July 1945, another singer fell ill at the famed 500 Club in Atlantic City. Jerry Lewis was on the same bill. Lewis begged club owner Skinny D'Amato to bring in Dean as a replacement.
Skinny came over to me that night and said, "Kid, you know anybody that can come in to replace this singer?" I said, "Well, yeah, I know a singer. He's really terrific." He said, "No, maybe I don't want a singer. Maybe we should just replace that guy with someone else." I said, "No, but listen to me. He's not just a singer. He and I have worked together before, and when he's on stage, I come on stage and we do some funny bits and things." And Skinny's eyes widened and he said, "Call him."
Martin arrived that same night, but again, Dean and Jerry performed separately.
So Skinny and Wolfie, his partner, came back to the dressing room, which was a nail, and Skinny looks at me and says, "What happened to those funny things between you two?" I said, "Well, you know what, Skinny?" He said, "No, I'm going to tell you what. If in the next show I don't see some of it, the two of you are going back to New York."
Before the next show started, Jerry and Dean wrote the comedy act that became Martin and Lewis.
We went out the second show and did 2.5 hours of every shtick and every piece that I could remember from burlesque. Every shtick and every piece I could recall my dad doing with his partners that he worked with over the years in the Boer circuit. And Dean didn't miss a beat, but brought an awful lot of stuff to the party. It was incredible. His natural tendency for humor and his natural, wonderful funniness himself made the two of us click.
The team of Martin and Lewis was an instant hit. Word spread fast in Atlantic City.
In less than 3 days, the lines around the 500 Club were so fierce that they had to turn out the local police to enforce some law. There were thousands of people outside the 500 Club. There only sat 300.
Dean and Jerry took their show on the road. By 1947, Martin and Lewis had the hottest new act on the Eastern Club circuit. Huge crowds turned out for each appearance, and the pair set box office records from New York to Chicago. Comic Bob Newhart saw the duo perform at New York's famed Paramount Theater in Times Square.
It was jammed. They were as hot as anybody ever gets. They did a thing. I guess they did it at the Paramount and everywhere. That at the end of the stage show, they would invite everybody to come out in the alley, and then they would throw out pictures of Dean and Jerry. And the purpose of that was to empty the theater because some people were staying for 5 or 6 or 7 shows.
In 1948, Martin and Lewis began to cash in on their success. As a team, they began earning up to $5,000 a week while performing. The pair made their first television appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show and on Milton Berle's Texaco Star Theater. Dean was becoming so big, it was unbelievable.
Oh, it took our breath away. We just, going from listening to a 3-minute record at a certain time on the radio, and then all of a sudden he was on Ed Sullivan. He was everywhere. Everybody knew who he was. And yes, it was just had some unreality about it.
Here they are, fellas, right out of their straitjackets. I give you now Mills, Kirk, and Martin.
Thank you very much.
There's Mills and there's Kirk.
Nice
Mr.
to meet
Jerry
you,
Lewis and Mr. Deanish Martin.
1948 brought Dean his fourth child, Deanna. The same year, Capitol Records signed Martin and Lewis to a long-term contract. Yet despite their popularity, Capitol president Alan Livingston had reservations.
I don't think anybody thought of them as a record artist or as record artists. It was a visual comedy act. And Dean's singing was somewhat incidental to the act itself. He sang well, but it was not what people want to see.
Would you say a few words? That's enough. Thank you.
Now,
I
we'd like to say that we're very...
On the way to the studio.
I like it.
I always do all the talking for the act here. Why don't you sing a few things? Well, I don't. Thank you. You've been fine.
Dean was soon relegated to singing less in the Martin and Lewis stage act. He was also becoming more dissatisfied being a constant second fiddle to Jerry's frantic clown act. Hollywood columnist James Bacon.
He hated being a straight man because basically he was a very funny guy. And of course he was the singer of the act. And he was, you know, a very handsome guy, and he had a romantic tone to his voice. He went over big with the woman, yeah.
By 1948, Martin and Lewis was the hottest new comedy team in America, but Dean was beginning to feel cheated.
You would pick up the morning paper after an opening at the Copacabana, and it was Jerry. Jerry this, Jerry that. In an interview, Jerry was the businessman. If you needed to get something done with Martin and Lewis, see Jerry. And then the paper would write how hysterical we were the night before, and it was Jerry, and Jerry, and Jerry. Oh, Dean sang, but then Jerry, Jerry.
When the E! True Hollywood story continues, it's out with the old, in with the new. Wife, that is.
A telegram came one day, said, "I love you, tickets on the way, and will you marry me?" That was it.
And later, the King of Cool makes red-hot TV.
The first time I went into his dressing room alone, I thought, this is kind of scary.
Lady Luck put Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis together, and their wild, irreverent act made them the top live performers of the day. It was a marriage of Mr. Cool and Mr. Crazy. Like most marriages, there were rocky times.
Getting away with murder, and it's got to stop, you understand? Shut up! Just because we were friends before and used to work together, I've been covering up for you. That's got to stop, too, you understand? Shut up!
By 1948, 31-year-old Dean Martin was wildly successful. Married with 4 children, Dean moved his family to Hollywood. Martin and his partner Jerry Lewis signed a 2-picture-a-year deal with Paramount Studios, and their future seemed assured. But that December, while performing in Miami, Dean met a 21-year-old Orange Bowl queen who came to one of his shows and instantly stole his heart. Her name was Jeanne Bigger.
You just looked right in my eyes, and I looked right, and it was a soul look. I mean, it really clicked. And it did that, and it stayed that way.
Forgetting about his wife Betty and their 4 kids, Dean fell head over heels for his Florida flame. He immediately moved out of his Beverly Hills home and began romancing Jeanne. Betty was deeply hurt, but hoped the affair would burn out. Betty's sister, Ann Herron.
She was such a good person, and for a long time, such a strong person. This was a very, very sad thing for her.
Martin, however, never looked back. In April of 1949, Dean and Jerry finished their first feature, My Friend Irma.
A male seal, a female seal, both together.
My Friend Irma was a smash, earning at least $3 million at the box office, a blockbuster in its day. Dean was now a movie star. In 1949, Dean and Betty's divorce became final, leaving Betty emotionally crushed.
He fell in love with Jeanne, and if Betty and Dean hadn't divorced, it probably would have played itself out, and it would have been an affair.
On September 1st, 1949, Jeanne became Dean's second wife in a lavish ceremony at a friend's Beverly Hills home.
I could see my family and Jerry and Dean's mother and father, all of whom are crying. And then Jerry, of course, went into the pool, dove into the pool with his clothes and did, you know, some shtick.
For one day at least, the normally reserved Dean let his emotions show.
He put his arms around me and held me tight, and he was crying of sheer happiness. The tears of joy that came out of his eyes, and I'm hugging him like a little boy, telling him it's okay, those tears are okay. You're doing something you've never done before.
Dean and Jeanne honeymooned in the new resort town of Las Vegas. Dean liked what he found. Within months, Dean and Jerry were back in Vegas filming their second movie, My Friend Irma Goes West. It was a typical Martin and Lewis vehicle. Dean sang a few songs and fed straight lines to Jerry. But being Jerry's stooge wore on Dean. Hollywood columnist James Bacon.
Jerry was getting all the laughs in the act. And Dean once told me, he says, the only line they ever gave him in the movies was, "They went that way, Jerry." He hated that. He hated being a straight man. Because Dean was very, very witty and funny. He was a funny guy.
Despite Dean's personal feelings, the Martin and Lewis train was moving way too fast to jump off. In the fall of 1950, the duo took on another medium, TV. They signed to host NBC's Colgate Comedy Hour. The director was a young man named Bud Yorkin.
Oh, it was hectic. It was totally hectic. They had so much going, and they were so busy. And when I started to direct this show, we were lucky to get 3 days rehearsal for the hour, and I don't ever remember of getting a complete dress rehearsal, and we went on live.
Once again, Martin and Lewis were a smash.
We only did, I think, 6 programs a season, because we didn't want to wear ourselves out. NBC would have given us most of Pomona if we'd have done a show every week. I said, no, it'll be once every 6 weeks in the 39-week season.
Typically, the critics gushed over Jerry and ignored Dean.
There again, Jerry this, Jerry that. And he handled it like a champion. The question here was, why didn't anyone see that I'd have been probably worthless without really the magic of the twosome, which was Dean?
If Dean was hurt by the lack of attention, he kept it to himself.
They had a big party at the Rainbow Room, NBC, up on the 50th floor of Rockefeller Center. And I was standing at the window, I never forgot the moment, with Dean. Dean and I were standing at the window, we both had a drink, and we looked down, and there you were, you could see the panorama of New York. And he said, man, I can't believe how lucky I am.
Their luck held throughout the early 1950s. Dean and Jerry set box office records with a spate of comedies, like That's My Boy and At War with the Army.
You're supposed to be my friend. We lived on the same block, in the same city. And you know what you promised my mother.
Stop hitting my desk. And what did I promise your mother?
That no one would harm a hair on my head.
You mean both heads?
Ho, ho, that's rich.
When Dean wasn't on a movie set, he was on the road with Jerry. That left little time for his new wife and almost none for his 4 kids from his first marriage. Daughter Deanna Martin Griffith.
At that point, he was like Dean Martin to us, because we would see him in the movies, and he'd come over every once in a while. But he wasn't so much like a dad, because we didn't see him that much.
After 3 years of marriage, Dean and Jeanne began having their own children. The first, Dean Paul, was born November 17, 1952.
Dean Paul was blonde, blue-eyed, this spitting image of me. Well, you can imagine Dean he just couldn't believe it. He wouldn't allow him to cry. He would just carry him all night if he had to. He just adored him.
But Dean did not feel the same adoration for his partner. In late 1952, Dean's dissatisfaction with Jerry was nearing a boiling point. Martin and Lewis were making their 10th film, Scared Stiff, when rumors began circulating that they were splitting up. At the time, former Capitol Records president Alan Livingston worked with both men.
My observation was that Jerry literally loved Dean. I mean, he really loved him as his partner. Dean, on the other hand, I think got to the point where he no longer wanted to put up with Jerry and Jerry's ambition and Jerry's drive and Jerry's comedy.
Can't blame Dean, because Dean was misused in all those movies, you know. He should have been used more of a romantic leading man with funny lines to say instead of stupid lines. That's what he used to always complain to me about.
If Dean wasn't the heartthrob he hoped to be on screen, he wasn't doing much better at home. In 1953, Jeanne stunned friends by announcing she and Dean were separating. Jeanne accused Dean of not communicating with her.
I probably wasn't getting enough attention, the quality attention that I wanted. I didn't want all of his time. I would have, 25% of it would have been fine if it was pure, if it was good 25%. But when he would falter in that line, I was out of the house.
But a month after their breakup, Jeanne found she was pregnant with her second child by Dean. The couple reunited. Dean also kissed and made up with Jerry, at least temporarily. In 1954, Martin and Lewis filmed their 13th movie, Living It Up. Co-star Janet Leigh.
Dean was hysterical. And he was on the set. He's so loose that it almost belies what a good actor he was.
Dean made it through Living It Up, but he was clearly nearing the end of his partnership with Jerry. Dean felt that he was talented enough as a singer and actor to make it on his own. However, Dean signed for still another Martin and Lewis comedy, Three Ring Circus, produced by Hal Wallace.
Hal Wallace called me up and invited me to play a clown in that movie. I didn't find out until later. It was about the time they were about ready to break up. Hal Wallace put me in the movie because he figured they wouldn't break up in the movie if they had a columnist on the set.
Wallace was correct. The duo didn't break up, but there was very little holding Dean and Jerry together.
He had a camp all of a sudden, and I had a camp. Where did we have camps? We've had 8 solid years of just you and me living together in a hotel. How did you get a camp, and how did I get a camp?
In April 1956, Dean and Jerry filmed what would be their last movie together, ironically titled Hollywood or Bust.
There's music and mirth all over the map as the boys take off on the transcontinental gal chase that will keep you in the state of hysteria. But we gotta warn you, the laugh quake's coming to California.
Wait, what are you doing? Anita, that's Anita. She fell in. I'm gonna go in and save her. I can't swim, but we'll both die together.
What Dad would say was that, he got fed up. Jerry wanted to do all of his other things. Jerry wanted to write and direct and do the music and do everything. And Dad wasn't interested in that. Dad just liked to do what he could do best, come in, know his lines, get on his mark, and get out. That was Dad's thing.
In June 1956, Martin and Lewis were finished. After making 18 movies and entertaining millions, Paramount Studios announced the historic partnership was over.
Well, should it tonight, long,
The thing that really, I believe, was the roots, the foundation, the substance of the breakup was he had taken enough. And he needed to get out and be his own man. He needed to sing, and he needed to perform, and he needed to be other than his partner.
Their last appearance together took place later that summer, where it all began, on the stage in New York.
When the show was over and they hugged and said goodbye, I know Jerry went to the Hotel 14, which was right next door, and with his entourage, and it was a very emotional, emotional thing. And Dean came home to our hotel, and we had fried egg sandwiches and watched TV, and he never said anything. I said, that doesn't tell you the difference between the two men.
When the E! True Hollywood story continues, Dean begins a new life without Jerry.
They weren't friendly after that. I mean, it wasn't really a nice separation.
And later, Dean, Frank, Sammy, Vegas, the Rat Pack.
Sam! What? I didn't mean to move in the neighborhood.
Cherry bombs, gags, toilet humor, everything went.
After years of simmering resentment, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis called it quits in 1956. Dean was now on his own, for better or for worse.
You always didn't used to treat me like this. Oh, stop mumbling.
You always didn't used to treat me like this. That's what I said, so there too.
You're going to start that again?
Yes, I am. You're supposed to be my friend.
One school of thought in 1956 maintained that without comic mastermind Jerry Lewis, 39-year-old Dean Martin would flop miserably. Daughter Deanna Martin Griffith.
He was scared, but you know, I think he always knew that he was going to make it.
Next stop, Rome. Land of Caesars, Michelangelo, and Lola Brigida.
In March 1957, Dean's first film without Jerry was 10,000 Bedrooms.
Arthur, I'm in love. It's very nice. I have to marry 4 girls. That's not a marriage. That's a merger.
10,000 Bedrooms bombed at the box office, but Dean's good looks and acting ability caught the attention of executives at the powerful talent agency MCA. MCA wanted Martin for an upcoming war picture entitled The Young Lions. Former wife Jeanne Martin.
I think it was a power move by MCA to get Dean into this role because Tony Randall had the role he was signed for.
But MCA bumped Randall in favor of Martin because the multi-talented Dean was a better investment. Hollywood columnist James Bacon.
MCA had Dean Martin, who to the agency meant commissions 4 ways: records, movies, nightclubs, and television. In other words, here's a guy they can make a lot of money off of.
The Young Lions featured the hottest actors in Hollywood at the time, Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. But Dean, who played a troubled draft dodger, held his own and earned rave reviews. Dean's performance in The Young Lions also caught the attention of Frank Sinatra. Sinatra picked Dean to co-star in a film he was making in the Midwest. Some came running.
You're right, teacher. You're 100% right. I've been a bad boy. I've been naughty.
Frank wanted Dean in the movie because he didn't want to be back there in Indiana all alone. And he figured, seeing Dean's nightclub act, he figured Dean was a swinger.
I learned a little while back that certain conditions bring a gambler luck, you know? And, oh, thank you. And this here hat's one of them.
Working together for the first time, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra became fast friends.
Frank would make him laugh. You know, I mean, they were just like 2 naughty boys. They just had so damn much fun. They did the most outrageous things, you know, cherry bombs under everybody's bed, and oh God, it was just a riot. But when it, come midnight, Dean wanted to go to bed.
It was during this time in 1958 that Dean and Jeanne sought custody of his 4 children by his first wife, Betty.
I could provide them with a better home than their mother could, and they needed a mother who could love them and provide them with all the necessities of that they deserved, of course. And I wanted them to experience their father. They had not.
Betty reluctantly agreed. Betty's sister, Ann Herron.
She put up a really good front in front of the kids, and that she was always as happy as she'd been, and made them feel very secure. But I'm sure it must have, I know it broke her heart. I know it did.
By 1958, Dean and Jeanne had 3 children of their own. Now Dean was dad to 7 kids, all under the same roof, a sprawling mansion on Mountain Drive in Beverly Hills. Dean's son, Ricky, remembers summers by the pool with 6 brothers and sisters.
One day we just spent the day out there playing, and as each one of the children came in, you know, the friends would leave, the children would come out, and finally there was just one guy there, just a guy out at the pool. So we figured, well, he must be one of the older girls or Craig's friends. And, so my mom went around and said, well, is this your friend? Who's this guy? No, he's not my friend. He's not my friend. It was just a guy who came in off the street and spent the day with the Martins at the pool.
The late 50s was a wonderful time to be Dean Martin. He was now 41 years old, he was finding success without Jerry Lewis, and his singing career had reignited.
Ladies and gentlemen, direct from the bar, Dean Martin.
When you're drinking, the show looks good to you.
2 of Dean's records, Return to Me and the Italian folk song Volare, became pop hits. On screen, Martin teamed up with John Wayne and Angie Dickinson in the western Rio Bravo.
Dean was excellent. He played the drunken deputy. God, he was so good. And I always thought from that picture Dean was going to become a movie superstar.
Like the multi-talented Sinatra, Dean Martin effortlessly glided from serious actor to fun-loving nightclub performer. Witness this performance on Sinatra's Timex television special in October of 1959.
Thank you. Yeah, you were loose as ashes. Great commercial, too. You got a nice little plug in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Sure. Well, you know, oh, shucks, I had something going for me. A great old song.
Wait a minute, I wouldn't exactly call that an old song.
Now, careful, Dickie. You've shown the world. You're going to show your crow's feet.
Those are laugh lines, Melvin.
Sinatra, Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop were dubbed the Rat Pack, known for their electric, if offbeat, stage act, their womanizing, and their drinking. The Rat Pack defined cool in the early 60s.
Oh, Judy, you can't take a baby out of a man's life and expect him to go on living the way he has been. It's not right and it's not fair. That's all I gotta say.
They appeared together in the movie Ocean's 11. Actor Henry Silva co-starred in the film, which was shot in Vegas.
You think there was fun on the screen? There was no sleeping. The guys, Dean was doing the show at night, shooting during the day, and then gambling and I don't mean heavy duty, but I mean, you know, like, he loved blackjack. Dean loved blackjack.
Far from his old gambling haunts, the ex-croupier from Steubenville became the most popular blackjack dealer in Vegas. Former Sands Hotel bell captain Lou Pearl.
He used to deal with people, and they'd bust the hand, you know, they couldn't win. He'd say, you got 20. And he paid, see? And everybody come running to their table. They wanted him to deal, see? Because they all knew that everybody that sat down was a winner.
The Rat Pack's never-ending party carried over from the set of Ocean's 11 to the stage at the Sands Hotel.
We're doing 6 shows a night here. We're hungry. How many? Well, 2 here, 4 in a room. That's 6, Daddy. I don't care where you count.
Though the Rat Pack always seemed to be ad-libbing naughty lines and Dean always seemed to be tipsy, looks were deceiving. The act was almost entirely scripted, and Dean was usually drinking fruit juice.
One day I happened to get into his dressing room. I was looking for something, but I looked over and I saw this Martinelli's apple juice. And that's what Dean used on stage, creating this image that he was a drunk. I'm sorry to break it for anybody that, you know, here I am giving away secrets and breaking things up, but that's all he drank was Martinelli's.
So keep drinking, that's what I'm thinking, 'cause it's what I sort of like to do.
Apple juice wasn't Dean's only secret. While the romantic exploits of Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis made newspaper headlines, Dean kept his private life private. Former Sands showgirl Charlotte Nort.
Frank couldn't pass up a woman any time. And he had the ladies all the time. But Dean, in his own quiet way, did pretty good, too. You know what I mean? He was a gentleman and quiet about it. That's the only difference.
Even more than beautiful women, Dean loved golf. Sands showgirl Jeanne Gardner.
Strangely enough, Dean was usually one of the first ones to leave a party because he wanted to be up early on the golf course. And they were always teasing him and kidding him about his game not being really good enough lately and better practice up on those swings. And, you know, they were always giving him a bad time about it.
As 1960 drew to a close, Dean was becoming more entrenched in Frank's world, which included newly elected President John Kennedy. Although Dean was apolitical, he did have strong feelings on some of the burning issues of the 1960s. One issue was civil rights, especially when it involved Martin's close friend, Sammy Davis Jr.
Sammy wasn't allowed. They wouldn't let him into a restaurant in the Sands. He could perform on stage and dance and sing and, you know, bring in lots of money, but they wouldn't let him eat in the restaurant. And Frank and Dad had a big say in that. They said, well, you know, if he doesn't get to eat here, we don't eat here, we're gone.
Dean took the same tack during Sammy's interracial engagement to actress Mai Britt. When the Kennedy White House, sensing controversy, asked Sammy to delay his marriage until after the president's inauguration, Dean stuck by Sammy.
Dad did not go to the inauguration because of Sammy. Sammy was getting married to Mai Britt, and you know, poor Sammy. I mean, he didn't do anything wrong. It was just the time in America that you just interracial marriages were not sanctioned. I mean, no one was really for that, and Dad said, you know, this is my friend, I'm sticking with my friend, and I'm not going.
In the spring of 1961, the Rat Pack reconvened on the plains of Kanab, Utah for the movie Sergeants 3. Actress Ruta Lee was the only woman in the film.
Dean floated like stuff on water. He was just incredible. I don't know if it was a practiced cool or if it was born cool, but he was very cool about everything.
Although Dean held many of his feelings inside, Sergeants 3 actor Henry Silva remembers an affectionate Dean Martin.
The wonderful thing that I remember about Dean is that whenever you talked to him, if he was sitting next to you, you'd have to have his hand on your shoulder, or he'd have his hand on your wrist, or if when he met you and he hadn't seen you for an hour and a half, he'd give you a hug.
Dean Martin's generous side was apparent as well. When co-star Ruta Lee lost a valuable ring on the set of Sergeants 3, Dean and friends gallantly presented her with a replacement.
The fact that they gave a damn, the fact that they cared enough to do something sweet for this little twit of a girl, you know, that was so awestruck by all these people, was overwhelming.
A familiar pattern formed on the set of Sergeants 3. The aggressive, hard-tempered Sinatra called the shots, while the easygoing Dean played comic relief.
Dean was the leveler. Frank was always hot. He was hot to move, he was hot to go. He was not the relaxed one. Dean was always the one that when Frank was about to blow a gasket about something, Dean would come up with a funny remark, take an attitude that was so easy that it was the velvet glove calming everything down.
He's the guy that led the humor parade, you know. He's the guy that you know, hey, these flies, they're bigger than the horses. My God, look at it. Oh.
After Sergeants 3 wrapped in May of 1962, Dean began shooting the romantic comedy Something's Gotta Give. Dean's co-star was a longtime pal, 35-year-old Marilyn Monroe. The film was troubled from the start. Marilyn's personal life was in shambles, and her behavior was becoming erratic. When 20th Century Fox decided to dump Marilyn and replace her with another actress, Dean stayed loyal to his friend and eventually quit the movie himself. But Marilyn's strange behavior on the movie set was actually the beginning of the end for this legendary beauty. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood, California home.
We heard on the radio that she had died. That she had overdosed. She wasn't murdered, and she overdosed. And then they wanted someone else to come in and take her part, her role. And Dean said no. He was devastated. Yeah, we both were.
In the fall of 1962, Dean began work on a dramatic film, Toys in the Attic. But the critics panned Dean's performance, so Martin returned to Las Vegas and reunited with Frank Sinatra and friends for one more movie. But Robin and the Seven Hoods turned out to be the Rat Pack's last film. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. His death marked the end of an era for both Camelot and the Rat Pack.